Hi friends, today I'm going to speak about a worldview issue with Islamic belief system. If you like my videos, please click below and please also join my YouTube channel. I'll really appreciate that. Today I'm going to speak about the theological worldview of Islam and its logical problem. I will compare it with a Christian faith system and show how Christian faith system is more rational, more reasonable, or more logical to believe. At first, when we speak about Islamic faith system, there's only one God, or there's no other God besides Allah. That sounds to be more reasonable and easier to believe than a Christian belief system which says about Trinitarianism, which is a little bit difficult for everyone to understand. But I'll actually show how Trinitarianism is more reasonable to believe than in the kind of faith that Islam teaches about God, which is known as strict monotheism. When we look at the theology or theological worldviews, there are different isms. We call them polytheism, believing in many God, monotheism, believing in one God. And then there are many other isms like pantheism, which speaks about one absolute being, but which is non-personal or impersonal. Then there is panentheism, there is deism, there is theism, there is open theism. All kinds of isms are there. And when we look at world religions, there are different world religions that are actually monotheistic. Islam is not the only monotheistic religion. In fact, Judaism is known to be the first world religion that is monotheistic. They were known as the flag bearers of monotheism in the past. I have already spoken about that in my previous sessions. Now, when we look at monotheism itself, there are many other religions that are monotheistic. For example, Judaism I already spoke about. Christianity was the second most popular religion, but even before that, there was a religion known as Zoroastrianism, which was kind of monotheistic, but they also believed that there were other small gods besides the main supreme god. And then we have other religions like Baha'ism, Sikhism from India, which are all monotheistic. But there is also a big difference between these monotheistic ideas. For example, Judaism and Islam fall into the same category, which believes in kind of a Unitarian belief of monotheism, or we can say strict monotheism. So monotheism versus strict monotheism. I know it will be, an easier way to compare will be like Christians and who are legalistic Christians, something like that. So monotheism and strict monotheism. So in strict monotheism, there is only one God, and in that one God, there is only one person. So that's like what Judaism believes in, and that's what Islam also later on believed. Now, when we speak about Christianity, Christianity also believes in monotheism. It believes there is only one God, but in that one God, there are three persons. So God is one being. It's very clear in biblical teachings, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, that there is only one God. But in that one God or one being that we call the one who is, the one who was, the one who will be, that one being, in that one being, there are three persons. Now, definitely that's a little complicated for anyone to understand, especially because we are one being, like I am one being, you are one being, but in us, there is only one person. So it's difficult for us to understand this concept, how there can be three persons in that one being. But that's the great mystery about God, because God is the other. God is not like us. God is not exactly like us. He is different. He is greater. God is much more complex than we can think of in our logical thinking. But when we speak about the other options, one of them is the strict monotheism that Judaism and Islam profess. So when we compare the belief system, we actually see that the Trinitarianism is actually more reasonable, more logical, and easier to believe than in a strict monotheism. Let me give you a couple of examples. Or let me tell you why that is so. Just think about God. In all these worldview system, we are talking about Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, they believe that God doesn't change. God remains the same in his eternal qualities. He doesn't change depending on what is happening in a world that is changing. The world is changing because it's created, it has a beginning, it will have end. So that means that it can never resist change. Beginning and then end is itself a change. So there is change always happening in the world. But in God, there is no change. He is the same, he is eternal, he remains the same. That's why we say God is the one who was, is, and will be. There will be no change with him. So when we speak about the nature of God, the basic nature of God, there cannot be any change. For example, if God is all good, all these three religions believe that God is all good, he has to be a loving God. You cannot have a God who is not loving and be good at the same time, right? So a good God has to be a loving God, and all these three religions believe that God is a loving God. Now, all these three religions also believe that God created the universe. God created everything in it, the entire universe, the earth, everything that's living in the universe. That includes angels, that are not in this world, in this earth, but even outside the earth. So beings outside the earth and the beings on the earth. God created them all. God created the great expanse, everything that we see, the stars, the sky, and all these religions teach, all these three religions teach that same thing. Now, think about that God. Now, it's easy for a Jew or a Muslim to say that God is love, or God is merciful, or God can reveal things, or God can communicate. Revelation is a communication. But think about that God being the same or having the same nature before he created anything. I already said, if God is good, he has to be loving. Now, how could God love anyone when there was nothing else created? We all believe that all these three religions teach that there was, a point of time when everything began. The whole universe was created as a time-space unit. Now, before that, when only God existed, how could that God be love when there is only one person existing? For example, let me ask this question. How could Allah be love? In order for love to exist, there has to be someone else whom that person can love, and there can be a way to communicate that love. So at least there has to be a second person to whom that love can be expressed, or is the recipient of that love. Now, if that second person is not there, love cannot be existing even in God, because there is no one to love. So if that's the case, Allah cannot be love. Allah couldn't communicate then, because with whom would he communicate? But the Christian, that's where the Christian idea or Christian belief system of Trinitarianism is more reasonable and rational, because God could actually exist as love eternally, because there are three persons and they could love each other eternally between those three persons, and they can have communication and fellowship, between those three persons. But the concept of Allah, where you have this strict monotheism, where only one person is existing before everything was created, there is nothing that Allah could do, because only he exists. There is no one to love, there's no one to be merciful, there's no one to talk to, there's no one to communicate, there's no one to have fellowship. Just he exists. That kind of God actually doesn't make any sense, logically speaking, because that God will be impersonal. Something like that we see in Hinduism. In Hinduism, the Brahman, not Brahma, the Brahman, the absolute being that they believe in, is impersonal, because they found that if there is this absolute being, which is only one, just like I said, he cannot have, or it, they say it cannot have any qualities. They call Nirguna Brahman, because there's no one else to communicate, no one else to love, no one else to have fellowship with. In fact, if you believe that in a strict Unitarian or strict monotheistic faith like that, the belief system of Islam also will end up in a system where Allah will not have any qualities. He will be an impersonal being. So, my friends, if you're a Muslim, listen to this. Please understand that Trinity is a difficult concept to understand, but it's actually more rational than a strict monotheistic faith that you follow. We believe in a God who is love eternally. He doesn't change, and he's always good. He's merciful, he's compassionate, he can relate to us as a person, he can talk to us, he can reveal things. That's the God we believe. And that's why Trinitarianism is more reasonable, though it's complex to understand, more reasonable, more rational, more logical than strict monotheism that Islam teaches. God bless you all. Have a good day.